this show is a more in-depth look at some of the hidden history and heritage of this area. There's a lot of great plans that have been discussed for the North Shore, but most of them have never happened. So it's time to move them all forward. We're in a process of planning for the Maui Island Plan, which is going to shape our course for the next 20 years or so. And the more informed and aligned and envisioning people are, the better community we're going to end up with. It kind of goes right back into what Yuki said about the mission of NPAC. It's like, yeah, let's combine the health of our communities, the health of our families, the health of our environment, and the planning that we do. So that involves your input because you're the experts. If you like what you see here and say, gosh, you know, we could do some neat things here in the North Shore. We've got an awesome heritage. We've got great people. We've got an amazing place.
Civil War is over.
Yeah, the Civil War is long over, and we can just get about the business of having a good life here. So anyway, as my friend Ed Lindsay was always fond of saying, you know, you can't understand the present without looking to the past. And the past can really help us a lot in terms of how we want to go forward for the present. So that's why I'm so interested in history. So this is a presentation sponsored by Maui Tomorrow Foundation. And they, you know, asked me to put my research into a PowerPoint. So starting out, as we learned on our walk, here the North Shore spans two traditional mokus, or districts, Hamakuapoko and Wailuku. And Hamakuapoko and Wailuku are divided by Kailua Gulch, which is that little white arrow there. And if you've ever like driven across that, where the driveway of Baldwin Beach is, there's a little bridge right before it. It's a place that always floods when we have big rainstorms. That's Kailua Gulch. And Kailua Gulch goes way up this mountain. It ends up as Waiho Springs Park up in Olinda. If you've ever walked your dog in Waiho Springs Park, that's Kailua Gulch. And it goes through Hali'imaile, it goes through Makawao. It's a major, major feature. Now, Hamakuapoko itself is a very interesting moku because it's so small, as I mentioned. And basically, it just goes from Kailua Gulch to Maliko Gulch. And in between is Paia and Kuau, both traditional communities that both had lots of action in pre-contact times. So the heritage does span many centuries. There hasn't been a lot of dating done here, but my guess is you're going to see stuff from the 1400s and 1500s when they do get some dating for this area and the habitation. This is a remnant of the Kailua Heiau. It may have another name, but it's right along the side of Kailua Gulch. And it's very common in other areas to have heiau as boundary markers when you're leaving one moku and starting another. I know it is a heiau because Uncle Rene Silva, who grew up here, told me about it and explained how it was when he was a kid, and that there was actually a freshwater pool nearby that they used to swim in. But that went away when more wells started pumping the groundwater. He was a kid here in the late 20s, early 30s. The eastern end is Maliko Gulch, which is a very magnificent place and very historically significant. A lot of taro growing and a village site above and within the gulch. So this moku is a small, compact moku. And it kind of centers around that little remnant of a cinder cone that we saw today, Naie. And although the area is called Sprecklesville, in other days it had other names. Naie was one place name used. As you went a little bit further past Kailua Gulch, the name Kapuka was used as a place name, meaning the fishing hole for the ulua fish. Kapuka, the puka, where the ulua fish hang out. And you'll see this in old deeds and descriptions. So you'll see Naie, you'll see Kapuka ulua, and you will see another word, keone po'o. We'll talk about that a little later.
I think it's worth mentioning that
what we're looking at, this is about a 10 or 12-year-old photograph, and this is right where we
That's right, that's where we are. We are here.
It was a cane field, but it was, now it's an ag subdivision, although we didn't really see any farms, but yeah, that's the block that we just walked through.
Good point, Rob, thank you. And as I mentioned on the walk, somewhere along in here, it may not be the exact alignment that we have of Hana Highway now, was the King's Highway that connected Wailuku and Paia and Haiku, because all these were traditional towns. All these towns are mentioned in accounts from back in 1500 and 1600, you know, legends and myths.
Did the King's Highway go all the way around the island?
Yes, on Maui it did. And Kihapi'ilani, that was one of his claims to fame. After he vanquished his brother, Lono Pi'ilani, he was told by his brother-in-law, Umi, one of the great chiefs of the Big Island, like, okay, yeah, you won the battle, dude, but if you really want to be remembered, build a road around your island. So he did. This is what Punene looks like today. This is from looking from the east towards the west. It's this little scrag of a cinder cone, and that's because, as I mentioned, the cinders were mined to create the Naval Air Station, Kahului or Nazca. And this is actually what it looks like close up. There's actually a geodetic survey marker right up in the top of this little scrag here, and there's a big hole down below it where the cinders were mined, where the edge of the pu'u used to be. And this stone alignment is very interesting, and these stones have a lot of old lichen and things on them. They've been here for a long time. They could be part of what was a heiau alignment. Hard to say. So we're at the Civil War now. So it's 1736. This 3-year Civil War begins in Lahaina, and it begins, man, they're radical over there. They dam up all the streams so there's no water coming down to Oluwalu, to Kauula, to Ukimehame. I mean, these guys were full on. And it was like one of these escalating things where I'm going to get my uncle from the Big Island to come over. Okay, I'm going to get my uncle from Oahu to come over. And pretty soon, thousands and thousands of people were dead. And commerce ground to a halt. And they had to feed armies and so forth and so on. So I guess what happened, it's not clear why they ended up over here. But evidently, they probably came over on this side of the island to get more food from Nava'eha, which was the breadbasket of Maui, and ended up just finding a nice big open space to have a battle. And that open space is the plains of Punene. Now, we all know that there's a mill that's named Punene, and that mill is kind of like over, I don't know, in here someplace, maybe over here. And why Mr. Baldwin just decided to use that name and move it over a mile or two is not recorded in history. But the place name Punene goes to that little pu'u, and it's referred to in many, many old documents. So I think we can trust it. So another view of the battle site, big open area. And you have to remember, even though people tell you that if there wasn't sugarcane here, it'd just be a dust bowl, well, that is true after the cloven-foot animals got through at the place. But back in the 1700s, before those creatures were here, this was like scrubbed dryland forest, a lot of Ilima papa, the prostrate Ilima. There would have been ali'i, there would have been other drought-tolerant plants that we see, willy trees, things like that. Olapua trees, in fact, there is a place named Olapua along the Kailua Gulch. So this was probably a scrubby area where there was, you know, a little place to hide. And probably someone climbed up to the pu'u and got some advantage of looking down on someone. But there sure are a lot of burials in these sand dunes here and in the dunes that are in the golf course. So the conclusion is that after the battle was concluded, the dead were dragged nearby and, you know, confined to the dunes. So the two sons of Maui chief Kekauliki, who battled, no one won, but eventually by stealth, the older son was killed. His name was Kau'i, and the victorious younger son was named Kamehameha Nui. So Kekauliki was the father of both, but they had different mothers, And Kamehameha Nui's mother was more high-born, the same mother as Kahekili, who eventually succeeded Kamehameha Nui. But this guy Kau'i was very interesting. His relatives ended up being very, very important people. How many of you have ever driven by Wahine Pio Street over by the community college? That was one of his daughters. Wahine Pio was one of his daughters. And so they were a very important family. She was a high-born chiefess. And several other, Boki was another one of the people. So hundreds were slaughtered in this battle on both sides. And peace was made at Punene. This is what the legend tells us. And the remains of many of the warriors are found in the sand dunes. And that is the place name Keone Po'o. Po'o means the head, and it's also kind of a poetic name for the skull. You'll hear Hawaiians say, oh, you know, I saw Iwi Po'o, I saw a skull there. Yeah?
I'm curious to know how many were engaged in this battle, because I'd like to have an idea of how many people lived here at the time.
Well, these weren't people who lived here. These were people who assembled for the battle. And Kamakau, who's the historian who recorded the battle in his Lives of the Chiefs, said that great was the fighting in Honokahua, but even greater yet was the slaughter on the plains of Pu'unene. And at last, fighting was called to a halt and peace was made. So it's a short little passage. So we know that there are many, many burials at Honokahua, the Ritz-Carlton, and we know that was a pretty big battle there. So we can assume that this was the same size or greater. But it wasn't necessarily about the people who lived here. It's like they probably ran and hid someplace so that they didn't have to get killed by somebody. And I will say that when you look up the records in the Bishop Museum, they have like a list of all the artifacts that have been found in different places. And there's a list of Maui of an axe that was taken out of the skull found in the sand dunes here of Baldwin Beach. So, you know, there are probably, if you did some research, some people with some weapons still in them that are buried in those sand dunes that were just, you know, dragged over there. Obviously a lot of heritage here. There's a number of heiau recorded in this area. Besides the Kailua heiau, which does still exist, there was a heiau that was on the shoreline before the shoreline was altered by the tsunami in 1946. And that heiau is now underwater. And Uncle Rene Silva remembers seeing it on the shore when he was a kid. But he said after the tsunami, the beach retreated 100 feet in the one day of the tsunami. So the beach at Baldwin Beach was 100 feet further out towards the ocean before 1946. And that heiau is now out there. And he said that he had actually seen it diving when he was a young man and went diving out there, you know, after this happened in the 50s. So it's still has its spiritual power, but it's underwater. And then many people don't realize that there's actually a fishing shrine just a little bit west of the Ho'okipa parking lot, the Ho'okipa beach. And we'll see some pictures of that. And then, of course, there was the Papa Nene heiau, which was near Pu'unene. And it's interesting that this is just what we know about, but as more research is done, you know, more things are translated, more things could come out. So this area was famous for its fisheries, and it had places to fish at the shore, places to fish from the cliffs, and abundant tide pools to gather limu and gather seafood. So a real breadbasket. This is right in front of Mama's Fish House, and I was told by Uncle Rene that that was actually a mulivai. It was actually a lagoon by Mama's Fish House. Even when he was a kid, it was like a wetlands. And there was a stream that came down and ran there. So things have really changed. In the 40s, one old timer, Mr. Domingo, told me that there was a vineyard there in the 40s. and planted where Mama's Fish House is today on the higher ground. But Mama's Fish House had to fill in below where the restaurant is in order to kind of have, a space for people to walk and everything, because that was really low ground and it was a natural wetlands. So when you have wetlands, you have a lot of possibilities of raising other food as well. You could farm fish in natural wetlands. You could grow things like vake or the mulberry plant that you use for kapa. So this is a relatively dry climate, but there must have been some sort of spring that was in that area. And that may be why the fishing is good there too, because wherever you get underground fresh water, you get the kind of limu or seaweed that the fish like. So here's another forgotten place. This is Nakalele Point, fishing koa, and it overlooks the beach. It's been almost forgotten. Uncle Rene got this sign put up in the 90s during the community plan process. And it's listed in the community plan as a sacred site. There's like a few little remnants that are overgrown with grass of a fishing shrine and some wall alignments. But it's a great place, great view. It's just before Ho'okipa. It's where they used to have the windsurf events. They'd set up all the tents and everything here. And now they just ask no cars. They used to be able to drive there. So Uncle Rene got the cars out. He got these signs have rotted away now. But Kamehameha School is going to come out here and do a service project this March. And I think I've convinced them to buy 2 new signs at least so that they can, the kids can install the signs and perpetuate our history. Legendary Maui chief Kihapi'ilani farmed the uplands that we know as Hali'imaile today. He grew sweet potatoes there. So a lot of people could eat here and could live here. And all along this shoreline, there are many, many traditional burials. There are burials that have eroded out here near Mama's Fish House, down further towards Kuau, along the shoreline when it rains. Jenny remembers this, I'm sure. I think you were one of the people that had to go there and curate the remains. And when these burials came before the burial council, lineal descendants came from Oahu and told who their families were and when they lived here and how many lived here. So there are some families that are knowledgeable about this place, but you just wouldn't know it. It's just all sugarcane fields now. So there's a lot of hidden history. So the next phase of our history starts with the Great Mahele. In the 1850s, a big chunk of land, Hamakuapoko, this is the moku of Hamakuapoko, and that's also an Ahupua'a name too. Hamakuapoko has 2 Ahupua'as. It has Hali'imaile and it has Hamakuapoko. It may have more, but they may be lost to time. But I don't know if you can read this, but it says, deed to the Board of Education to Oahu College. So the Board of Education deeded this to Oahu College. And then down here was a little chunk, and then a number of people bought it up, including Haiku Plantation, who were Alexander and Baldwin Partnership. And they sold off, this map is from a study that was done of Alexander and Baldwin's land. So this is a map from maybe the 1870s, something like that. And you can see this chunk of land we kind of know as Paia. This is Kapukaulua Beach, so this is the lime kiln site. And everything here, this is like where the youth center is, and then this is like where Uncle Rene lived, and all the ocean front of Paia town. But this was all sold to 28 natives. So it didn't end up part of the plantation system, and that's why you have private houses there today. So it's sort of an important historical fact that there was some private ownership. And then later on, when the mill got established and the business community got established, all the privately owned businesses were down along the shoreline part, lower Paia as well. That's where the Chinese workers, once they had finished their contract, they'd save a little money and they'd go down and they'd start a mom and pop store or some sort of service that was needed by their fellow workers. This is the top part of the same map, a little hard to see, but each one of these little things here, these are old mills. So this is Kaluanui, and this is Pohole, and this was the old courthouse, kind of across from where the road is, past the Hui, Kaluanui Road that cuts between Baldwin Avenue and Haiku Road. There was a courthouse up there at one time. So interesting, these old maps. Well, the plantation, after the Mahele, the plantation days could kind of get into full swing because there was land available. And then we saw just kind of a real building spree of mills. And the first mill that's in this North Shore area, there was an earlier one in Haiku that was established about the same time. But on this side of Maliko Gulch, there was a mill built at Paliuli. Now, this isn't a picture of it, and I don't know if a picture exists. But this is a picture of the Makawao Union Church that was built in 1909 on the site of this original Paliuli mill. Paliuli is where Mr. Baldwin was unfortunate enough to get his sleeve caught in a piece of machinery he was trying to fix, and he got his arm mangled and became one-armed after that. And someone else started Paliuli plantation, but Alexander and Baldwin bought it. And shortly after they bought it, they realized that they're going to have to get a steady supply of water if they wanted to utilize more lands in the Hamakuapoko area. The lands were available, but the water needed to be available. So they took a contract in the 1870s and were able in 2 years to complete a ditch system that went all the way out to Hoelo, where I live. About 16 miles, and they had a siphon and a bridge across Maliko Gulch, and they were able to revolutionize farming by bringing that water in.
Lucienne, just back at that last picture, isn't that where he did that daring feat?
That is
with his one arm?
Yes, that is the daring feat where the crews were kind of spooked because Maliko Gulch had a reputation of having, you know, spirits and so forth. Plus, it was 400 feet down, and you were supposed to go down and take these big sections of cast iron pipe that were held together with pitch where they were joined, and lower them down and link them together and make a siphon that went down one side and up the other of Maliko Gulch. And so the crew just refused to go. So Mr. Baldwin, who was still pretty much in his prime then, this is, you know, H.P. Baldwin, and he took his one good arm and descended the rope. He was in his 40s, and got down to the bottom, showed the men it could be done, kind of shamed them, and then they went down, and then they started handing the sections down, and that was the last thing that had to be completed, and they were racing against the deadline. And probably most of you know this story, is Klaus Spreckels went to the king after the contract had been issued to the Alexander and Baldwin partnership, and they were financed by Castle and Cook, actually. That was where the money came from for this project. So, you know, Spreckels was kind of the odd man out, and he said, well, you know, I want to do the same thing. I want the same contract. And the king says, well, I already got one contract, but I'll tell you what, you know, if they don't finish in 2 years, I'll put that in their contract. If they don't finish in 2 years, then you can just take it over and you give me this sum. So, of course, they did finish in 2 years. So Spreckels went and built his own ditch, and we still have old sections of it out in Hoelo. It goes right through our community, and later it was adapted as the new Haiku ditch, but it was built on big concrete things with big pipes and so forth. And so both these guys, you know, were think big type people. That's all I can say. So after the treaty was signed, where Hawaiian sugar got free of tariff in the United States market, and after water was delivered across Maliko Gulch, Alexander and Baldwin constructed the Hamakuapoko mill, which was quite a substantial mill. And probably most of you have seen the ruins of this mill. Anybody here hasn't seen the ruins of the H. Poko mill? No. Well, it's still out there by Old Maui High. And it's now an art project. It's full of graffiti and so forth and so on. But it was constructed in the 70s and finished in 79. And ran for a number of years. This is what it looked like in 1960, the inside of the mill. Someone documented it before a lot of the graffiti got going. The right-hand picture is maybe from a few years ago. It's what it looks like now, you know, all the walls have graffiti on them. It's a place where the kids hang out. But it was the center of a very busy village. There was a school, and there were stores. And actually, H-Poco, or Hamakua Poco, persisted as a village because of old Maui High being there up until like the 1950s and 60s. I know people who grew up there and, you know, who were my age. So the sugarcane fields that surrounded this mill, this Hamakua Poco mill, were processed in the mill, and then the finished barrels of sugar were taken by steamship. But they were not taken, surprise, surprise, from Kahului. They were taken from Kuau Landing. Because why? Klaus Spreckels controlled Kahului, and Alexander and Baldwin didn't before the 1890s. So in the 1880s, when the Hamakua Poco mill was in its heyday, the sugar production was shipped. There was like a little landing area right in here in Kuau, and there's actually some remnants of it. I think there's some old walls and stuff in here where the ships could kind of come in fairly close, and then they would have rowboats and stuff that, you know, went all the way in. But this was an important center of commerce, and now it's a nice place to live. So back to Mr. Spreckels. He decided in 1882 not to be outdone by Alexander and Baldwin. They got their mill up and running in 1879. So he got about 4,000 acres of land by, I won't even go into the story, but calling Princess Ruth's bluff that she owned half of the royal lands. And his settlement was a huge chunk of land. And so he took some of this land and started the Spreckelsville Plantation, modestly named after herself. And he built this substantial edifice here. It was a state-of-the-art plantation. It had electricity, as I mentioned, and just a lot of innovative things went into it. Because after all, he was a German. He went back and forth between Europe and America. It had a new patented process for the grinding wheels for the cane. Lots of new things were tried out. And you know, these were bold thinkers, these pioneers in the sugar industry, and they had to, like, each one, you know, had to kind of invent the technology that they were using, or at least explore for those who had it, invented it, and bring it to the mills. So this is another view of the Spreckelsville mill, obviously from the sandier side of things, and it is right outside here, just down the block from us, was this large mill and a railroad that went all the way into Kahului, and you can see some of the tracks here. And of course, workers' camps, stores, school, everything you needed to have like a modern little village. In the late 1890s, when Alexander and Baldwin were taking over the HC&S, and HC&S was Spreckels' name. It wasn't, everyone associates it with Alexander and Baldwin now, but Hawaiian Commercial and Sugar was Klaus Spreckels' company. So A&B gradually bought out more and more shares and took it over, and so they became the majority owners, and they dismantled this state-of-the-art plantation and took everything over to Naie, which at that time was a brand new mill in the 1890s, and Naie mill opened around 1903, something like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't look so good today, so I don't have an outstanding picture of it in its heyday. I'm going to have to work on that. And along with the takeover of the Spreckelsville mill, Alexander and Baldwin got all the land around Kahului Harbor, and they were able to dredge it and expand it, and the spoils from the dredging they used to fill in the Kanaha Pond, which was once two royal fish ponds. So it's now one royal fish pond, and that's the Kahului industrial area today. So by 1898, Hamakua Poco mill was also closed, and the machinery was moved to the new Paia mill. So everything kind of moved to these two mills, which lasted, most of the 20th century.
Naie and Paia.
Yeah, so Punene and Paia became the two primary mills for HC&S. And as we know, most of the other companies, folded. Pioneer Mill persisted for a while, but the Wailuku Sugar Company went out of business long before. So the machinery was moved to Paia, the mill on the hill. There was an earlier mill in the 1880s in Paia, a different location, and I'm not sure where that location was. Might have been actually the one by the old church that they're referring to. They're not clear about it in the text I've read. So the mill was rebuilt in this location where it is now, rebuilt from over a 3-year period, and then it was closed around 2000 after basically 100 years of service. So this is a very interesting map. It shows some things that many of us think really shouldn't be forgotten, and this is the people who lived and worked in the sugar fields. These are all the camps. Look at all these colorful camps. There's Russian village and Japanese village and Codfish village and Hawaiian village. And some of these villages, one was right across the street from us. Hawaiian village was right across the street from Kaunoa School and Kaunoa Center. And Japanese village was just a little bit further on the Makai side of Hana Highway, where that bend starts. And Russian village was behind it. And then some of the villages were along the old Sunnyside Road, Codfish Village, Village 2, Lower Village, Middle Village. And these were all places where people lived and had stories and so forth, and they're really part of our heritage. And we see a few remnants. This is the old lime kiln site, and you can see some of the railroad ties that once ran out to the lime kilns. They're, when the tides eat away the sand, they become unburied. And by the 1960s, all of these villages had pretty much moved to Dream City. There were a few holdouts that folks lived in some isolated areas up on Upper Baldwin past the 60s. But pretty much most of the population, and this was a highly populated area, over 10,000 people lived between Sprecklesville and Upper Paia in the 1930s and 1940s and 1920s. So they all moved to Kahului, and this land reverted back to cane fields.
Didn't village get its name?
According to the history I read, the ethnicity of the workers was where the names, but eventually they all kind of integrated, and different people moved into Russian village, and Hawaiian village had people who weren't just Hawaiian and so forth and so on. But there must have been a group of Russians that worked. Contract workers came from Sweden. They came from all over to work in the sugar mills. People were looking for opportunity, and there we go. So we're jumping into the North Shore today and looking at our opportunities to plan our green infrastructure, which is sort of part of the NPAC mission here. So we know that the new economy of the North Shore is recreation, fishing, tourism. They're all going to play important roles in the new economy of the North Shore. And residents just over and over again rate the need for protected coastal lands very high. Whatever strategic plan or community plan you go to, people just say that this is the bottom line here. We've got to take care of the places where we go with our families and the places where, we have our family stories and our family histories. And Rob will remember this. Back in '98, there was a proposal to develop houses and a bike path. Makai of the golf course. There were going to be about, 20 houses or something there, and about 400 houses across the street from the golf course. And hundreds of people came out and testified, and this plan went nowhere. So what else can we do? Well, many community organizations have great ideas for the North Shore. Paia Main Street worked with hundreds of citizens, gathered input, got together a strategic plan. It identified all kinds of creative things could be done, having farmers market, having more bikeways so that, when visitors come, they have other things that they can do. And they really saw here that the green infrastructure and the economic opportunities were a natural fit. Paia Youth and Cultural Center envisions a Paia Bay campground where they can manage and have an income stream. You know, there's a good idea. They don't own any land, and they, you know, rent the building from, or get a lease of the building from A&B. So, and then there's Maui Tomorrow's project, Trees Please. You've all noticed we've lost a lot of trees at Baldwin Beach recently, and thanks to Barry and Stella Rivers, who raised some money. There's a project, and it's not easy, because this is the most erosion-prone shoreline on Maui, and more trees are lost every year, and it's changing the beach experience that people are having. So Trees Please is this project of a variety of organizations and community groups, but Maui Film Festival has raised most of the funding for it and gotten some other businesses involved who can donate plants. But the hard part is getting the county to agree where they could be put, because we're looking at putting in good-sized trees and having, you know, having shade trees in a few years that you can enjoy. So this is an ongoing project. We're hoping to announce something maybe by summer that there'll be the first plantings, but it's a little slow with the county. Obviously, there's a great need for green infrastructure like bikeways and greenways, because this is what Hana Highway looks like a lot of the time if it's high season or just between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock. And this is what it could look like. You could just have a nice place for people to enjoy roller skating and walking and riding their bikes and carrying their surfboards to the beach and so forth and so on. So we need to think big here. NPAC is moving forward to complete the North Shore Greenway bike path, as we all know, between, well, Keopulani Park, actually, but certainly Kanaha Park, there's a nice section there, and Paia Town, we have the last section to go. But this is the take-home message. We have many more opportunities that lie ahead. This is a map that Susan Bradford, myself, and others helped put together a compendium of all the studies that had been done recommending different things for the North Shore. And if you overlaid it on the county's directed growth map, all these green areas are proposed park or open space on the county's Maui Island Plan directed growth map. And all these other lines are greenways and bikeways that have been discussed either in our community plans or in the Paia strategic plan or in the Upcountry Greenway, these are Upcountry Greenway, or in the North Shore Greenway, which is this red line here, the Baldwin Avenue bike path that would connect us with Makawao. These are all good ideas that people have had. And we're going to have this map on display on the 4th at the Sierra Club meeting so people can take a look at it. We have a nice big version. It'll be at least as big as you see it on the screen here. But these are all opportunities that different groups could adopt to have lots more ways to enjoy getting around here. And in the Paia Main Street Strategic Plan, it really noted the need to secure more park and open space connected by bike paths for the area. And if you look at a quick review of the history of park creation here, it becomes very clear that if citizens do not take the lead, nothing will happen. So we have Paia Bay Park. It was a rubbish dump in the 20s. In 1934, it was converted to a park by community volunteers. At that time, it was Outdoor Circle. And then once that was done, A&B leased it to the county. In 1947, it was traded for some state land along with the land at Ho'okipa Beach. And we got a 1-acre park. So that's one of the few pieces of land along the shoreline that's actually owned by the public here in the North Shore. Then there's the old lime kiln site, Kapukaʻolua. And in the 20s and 30s, it was a sand mining site, 30 cubic yards a day extracted. 1994 was identified in the community plan as open space and park. A few years later, it was sold. 3 houses, 3 cottages, and swimming pools were planned and proposed. In 99, a brave citizen sued the county for improperly granting permits. There's that citizen action again. And by 2006, the county had completed purchase of the 5-acre site at the cost of, I don't know, $5 million. So it is now publicly owned. It needs a friends group to decide what happens to it next. This is what it looks like. It's all overgrown. A half-built residence is there and a whole-built residence, and it really needs some help. Then we have the Baldwin Beach story. Baldwin Beach also was sand mined for 60 years. In the 1940s, there was a USO center, and it was a troop recreation area. In 46, the tsunami removed 100 feet of beach depth there, so it really changed a lot. In 47, HC&S opened it up as an employee recreation area, built the pavilion, built the original pavilion. And in 63, it was leased to Maui County as a beach park. Some of you probably remember that pitiful little campground that used to be out there under the palm trees. In 1996, all the area that's the beach and the dunes behind the beach was shown in the Paia, Haiku, and the Wailuku Kahului community plans as park and open space. In 2010, they're shown in the draft Maui Island plan as park. And what? We lease them for $10 a year from Alexander and Baldwin. We don't own an inch of any of this land except the lime kiln site and the little Paia Base park. So citizens have their work cut out for them. So our Maui Island plan does include green infrastructure. This is an expansion of Ho'okipa Park, and the hope that there would be bikeways and trails, and then there would be bikeways and trails connecting somewhere through here and connecting to an expanded Baldwin Beach Park as well. This is the area out near the airport where the state had to like buy land and relocate houses, and so there's beach land along there. And then this is Baldwin, this is Baby Beach or Vavau, and this is Baldwin Beach Park. And you'll notice there's some Mauka land. This is the heiau site, the Kailua heiau site, which is just a short distance from the road. And in some versions of the map, this green area goes all the way to that heiau with the idea that, you know, you should have sort of a buffer that includes that cultural site. So maybe some restoration would be possible. But the reason that there is land on the Mauka side is because this erosion-prone area, it might be eventually all the parking has to be on the Mauka side. And what we have left of the beach can't be used for parking. You know, we just have to think long-term here. So getting to the end, lots of different people have come up with ideas for this area. A young architect came up with an idea that there should be a heritage loop, that there should be like a way of bike and walking, and she used Sunnyside Road as a pathway, so this is getting back to what Susan mentioned, that you'd preserve a green corridor along there, and people would be able to make a whole loop with their bikes or cut over along before Baldwin Avenue and do a shorter loop. And that along the way, you could visit Naie, you could visit the old site of Codfish Village. She did these placards of what it could look like. You know, you could recreate a Hawaiian village. She was getting her master's degree, so she put a lot of energy into this. But it's a concept. It would allow people to understand who came before and look at some of these plantation camps and not have to just go to the Sugar Museum to see things like this, but to really be on the ground where people lived. The Sugar Museum is way over here in Naie, yeah. And it has a lot of wonderful displays. So this is a version of that showing the developed land. So the purple land are lands that are already zoned for development. This is based on the existing community plan. So the point is like, hey, before we decide to develop more, and the light purple is areas that could develop outside the currently developed areas, and you still have, you know, plenty of room for growth here, but you'd also have plenty of room to preserve the heritage and really make something that was quite value added. Like one of the things in the strategic plan for Paia is to have like a museum. They thought the old train station, which is up here along Baldwin Avenue, near the sugar mill, would make a great little museum about the cultural and agricultural heritage of the area. But if you had a preserve area on both sides of the highway, you could have a space for a farmer's market, you could have parking, so forth and so on. So it could allow the town to have business and to have places for concerts and outdoor events and things like that, and be very value added. So, you know, just lots of different ideas. And just in conclusion, the health of our families and our communities depends upon how we plan to grow. So we can either like think big, and in this artist's rendition, we kept big agricultural preserves Now, this isn't an A and B's plan. They've taken all of this land out of important ag land on both sides of Paia, and their important ag lands are only upper lands like Hali'i-Maili area. So leadership is needed. If we're going to build a path connecting our heritage and our future, we need everybody's ideas, and we need those who are going to step up to the plate and say, I'm not going to go away until this good thing happens.